My name is Dickson, and I want to welcome you to another edition of our structure fishing workshop. Today we're beginning a brand new study on weather and water conditions and how it affects the movements and migrations of the fish. Now, in our past studies, I'm sure you remember me mentioning these words, weather and water conditions, on many different occasions. But we never went into any details about it. So we're going to be entering into today a true study on the effects of the weather conditions and the water conditions on the movements and the migrations of fish. Now, in our very early studies, we established that most all water has no fish, and we also established, as we were studying basic movements of fish, that adult fish, schools of adult-sized game fish, spend about 90 to 95% of their entire adult life in deep water. Now, we also established that the deeper you go in any body of water, the colder the water. And fish being cold-blooded, what that means is they become slower and slower and slower the deeper they go, till they reach a semi-dormant state. In fact, sometimes those fish become so dormant they're nearly impossible to catch. So if they spend 90% of their lifetime in that position, question comes up, how the heck are we going to catch them? Well, we answered that. We pointed out to you on a normal fishing day, fish will become active and migrate out of that deep water sanctuary zone towards the shallows. And we said, as fishermen, that saves us. It gives us a chance. And then we're also saved again because we pointed out that this movement or migration is never in a haphazard fashion, but it's along well-defined routes. Routes which the fish can see, and we describe those areas as structure. Now, right here's the key. If you remember, at that point, while we were going over that exact discussion, I brought up that how far these fish go and how long they stay as they migrate towards the shallows. How far they go, how long they stay, will be completely dependent upon the weather and the water conditions. I know you probably remember I said that, but then we didn't go into detail about weather and water, but that's what we're going to be doing over the next few weeks. We're going to be talking about weather and water conditions, how it affects the fish. Now, at first glance, most fishermen will say, well, shoot, I can't do anything about the weather condition. I have nothing to do with that. And I certainly can't change this water out here. So why should I bother studying about weather and water when I can't do a thing about it? Okay, so if we can't do anything about the conditions of the weather and water, why in the world then should we spend any time studying it? Well, let's put it this way. The reason that it's important to gain this knowledge of all of the effects that weather and water conditions have on the movements and migrations of fish, it's going to allow us to cope a little bit better on each and every fishing trip. With whatever the situation that comes up, we'll be able to cope with a little bit better if we have an understanding of how they're affected as we're going into that day of fishing. Now, the study of weather and water conditions is a very broad subject. But for the purposes of this study, I'm going to try to break it down into its simplest form, shorten it up a little bit, and give us the keys that we're going to need to go fishing this summer. And I know the fishing season has already started in some places. So we need to move along, and we're not going to spend a month and a half on weather and water, but we are going to spend the next few sessions on weather and water. But I want it to be sort of a broken down, simplistic understanding of weather and water conditions so that we can then create a guideline that will allow us to go fishing and utilize this knowledge to our benefit so we can be more successful. Now, before we get running hot and heavy on this study, I want to get one thing out of the way real quick. One of the first things that seems to come up when you're talking about weather and water conditions, most fishermen immediately tend to think in terms of temperature. They talk about temperature all the time. Well, the water is such and such degrees, and and so on and so forth. They talk about it all the time. Buck used to say the only thing temperature does is determine whether or not we're going to be having a pleasant experience or an unpleasant experience. Because sometimes it can be so cold. I know some people up in Minnesota are thinking about this. It can be so cold at times that you're just not having fun. Sometimes in Florida, it can be so hot. Even if the fish are doing, it can be so stinking hot that we're just not having any fun out there. We see a lot of those long sleeve shirts that the folks in Florida use so they don't burn up, out there fishing sometimes in 100-degree weather. Sometimes it's not real pleasant. So that's the biggest thing. But then he also says, but it may affect the fish somewhat at times. Really talking in terms of determining in the early season when fish drop the eggs and that kind of a thing. But here's what I want to point out and get this out of the way real quick because it's something that's still out there. I thought it was buried with my great-great-grandfather, but it has not been buried yet. For years, people would describe the summer months as the dog days of summer. From a fishing standpoint, you'd read it in the magazines all over the place. It's the dog days of summer. Their reasoning behind all of that was the fish are so hot. They're so miserable. They've run off somewhere into the deepest hole to try to find some cooler water. I'm telling you, this is the stuff you read. It's still out there today. And conversely, you'll hear people talk about a great fishing trip they had in the spring. They were way back in a cove where the water was such and such a temperature. It was way warmer than it was out in the main lake. And they caught a bunch of fish and they said, it's because we found this cove. It had that warm water in it. Like the fish were sitting out in this deep hole in the cold water. And Papa Fish said to Mama Fish, hey, babe, it's really cold right now. I'm freezing to death. What do you say we go over to James Cove over there? Because I heard it's, nice and warm water over there, and we could go over there and warm up. Yeah, it's laughable. The people in the cove were catching fish because the fish were spawning. It was a seasonal movement of the fish. Had nothing to do with the temperature. And conversely, some of the best fishing of the year is going to come right at noontime in the middle of August. Trust me when I tell you that. People that have fished a lot know this to be true. But some people just fish in the spring, catch a few fish, and then they go golfing for the dog days of summer. When in fact, the greatest movements in the year are going to be in the summer months, in the hotter season. Now, there's a reason for this. Now, I know this is 101 stuff, but for some new viewers that may not know the answer, I want to cover this. Fish are cold-blooded animals. What that means is the translation of that is their body is the same temperature as their environment. That's a physical thing that takes place that they have nothing to do with. If that water temperature is 45 degrees, the fish is 45 degrees. If the water temperature is 65 degrees, that fish is 65 degrees. But here's the kicker. He feels the same. That fish always feels comfortable. When it comes to temperature, his body automatically takes on the temperature of his environment. Cold-blooded creatures. Look it up. Gators, snakes, cold-blooded creatures. Snake's real fast in the summer and he's real slow in the winter. He's cold-blooded. So is a fish. Now, as we begin this study, I'm going to separate it. I always talk about weather and water conditions, but I'm going to separate it. We're going to talk about weather first. And then later on, we're going to talk about water. Now, we know we can't change the weather, as I said, but we need to understand it and the effect that it has on fish. It's going to help us in our fishing. Trust me. But with water, we can't change water, but we sort of can choose water. And that's going to come into play later. So our discussion on water conditions is going to be far greater than our discussion on weather conditions. However, we're going to start with weather. Now, if you check the weather report on the news every night, or if you pull it up on your computer, or if anybody's still reading newspapers, you can look at your national weather map in the newspaper. And I used to do that, by the way. I used to look and sort of play games with my interpretation of weather, saying, well, if I was in Dallas, Texas, would I want to go down to Sam Rayburn tomorrow and fish, or would I wait till Saturday, Or how about in Chicago? Do I suppose I might want to go to Shelbyville and do some fishing on the weekend, or you suppose I ought to go today? And I would, always be looking at these weather maps and try to determine where the good fishing could be and where it wouldn't be so good, and when it might be good and when it might turn bad, and so on and so forth. And you should try doing that same thing. But at any rate, when you look at one of these weather maps, I mean, there are so many different weather conditions, it's silly. We got low pressure, we got high pressure, we got cold air, we got warm air, we have cold fronts, we have warm fronts, we have hailstorms, we have thunderstorms, we have squall lines. What else we have? We have hurricanes, we have tornadoes. You just go on and on and on and on. Now, this is the fish's environment. Don't forget. This is what he's stuck with. You and I, we just go in the house. That's his house. The water's his house. And all of these weather conditions affect his environment, and therefore affects him. It affects his stability. Because anytime there's a change in weather, it's not stable, obviously. It's a change. It's not stable. It's opposite of what that fish needs. So as you look at all of those weather conditions, bottom line is we need to pick one of those weather systems or one of those weather conditions to be a guideline. Guideline for you and me. We can't be worrying about all of them. Can't be. And really, the idea behind what I'm saying is we need to have something that will key us and allow us to interpret our trip, interpret what our key to success might be if we're going fishing this Saturday. We need something that we can key on. Bottom line is we need a guideline. I keep talking in all of our studies about you need a guideline as to where the fish will be. You need a guideline as to how to pinpoint the fish. You need a guideline to tell you where the contact point is and all those things. Now, in weather, we also need a guideline, and we have one, and that guideline is a cold front. Now, a cold front doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a big drop in temperature. There normally is a bit of a temperature change. However, a cold front is simply a dividing line of two air masses, and normally these systems come from west to east in the United States. But normally you have this separation point or a line that separates two different air masses, and that's referred to as a cold front. You'll notice on a weather map that big line that goes across, normally from northeast to the southwest. It's a big line there. It's showing you a cold front where you have two air masses, and one is with cooler, drier air. The other air mass is warmer with much more moisture. Basically a high pressure system and a low pressure system. These two air masses, when they collide, they create what is known as a cold front. Keep in mind now, as we are interpreting this cold front, we're interpreting not temperature, nor oxygen, nor anything else. We're interpreting this cold front in terms of light. It's the number one thing that bothers the fish the most. It's the thing that they have the hardest time adjusting to. So how does the passing of this front, when you're thinking in terms of light condition, how does it affect the position of the fish? I'm going to show you a side view drawing of your lake, my lake, every lake that there is. In most all cases, those fish are going to drop as deep as they can drop. Keep in mind, their eyes take in 5 times more light than ours. They only have one escape from that bright light, and that is dropping deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. just how deep they go will be dependent upon the severity of the front. But one thing I can promise you, they're going to drop deeper than their normal sanctuary zone. And you know what the normal sanctuary zone is. If the depth of water is available, it's going to be 30, 35 feet. They're going to drop deeper than that. They're going to keep dropping deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper until they reach a stable condition. I have no idea. It could be 40 feet, it could be 50 feet, it could be 60 feet, which would be normal if that much water is in your lake. 60 feet is a normal post-frontal condition. This is where you're going to find a fish. But in any case, if you don't have that kind of depth, your fish in your lake are going to be as deep as they can get. But one thing's for sure, they're going to be dormant. They're going to be inactive. And that condition can last for days, not just one day. It can last for days. And I thought the best way to show that, and I'll do that the next time we get together, I'm going to take you through a week after the passing of a cold front to give you some exacts, to give you some, this is really what you can expect. And again, don't forget, what we're trying to do is we're trying to set up a guideline. And in the case of weather, that is our guideline, cold front. We have some other conditions which we'll talk about from time to time, but our main guide in interpreting weather conditions and how it affects the fish is a cold front. So next time we get together, I'm going to take you through day 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7 after the passing of a cold front and give you some real details on that. So thanks for being with me again today. I appreciate it. Hope you learned a little something. And next time we get together, we're going to really get into the details of how fish are reacting on a day-to-day basis after the passing of a cold front. And then we're going to move on and talk about how water conditions can affect the movements and migrations of the fish. So as I close off today, I want to encourage you to like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and be sure to subscribe to our channel if you would. We sure would appreciate it. See you the next time.